Bartholomew Town.
Welcome into Bartholomew Town. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Remember, you can hear us wherever you get your favorite podcast, ripodcast.com, and Saturdays at 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. now on WPRI as we wrap up what has been a very kind of a different type of year here, 2025 in Rhode Island politics, one of those anticipation years looking ahead to 2026, which is anticipated to be quite the opposite. We'll have a governor's race, no doubt, that will dominate a lot of the conversation, but a lot of other races and conversations that'll definitely be important to anybody who cares about this stuff. And if you're listening to this show, you probably care. If you're listening to this show, you definitely know who our guests are today. Ian Donnis, Ocean State Media, that's our NPR and PBS affiliate here in Rhode Island, the host of One-on-One with Ian Donnis, a great new addition, sort of an amalgamation of your old show, Political Roundtable, with some new ideas here in Rhode Island. Ian, thanks for the time.
Thanks for the introduction, Bill. Happy to be with you.
And, of course, the one and only Ted Nesi of WPRI Television, also a contributor at Ocean State Media. WPRI continues to do great work in so many different aspects, and particularly in the investigative side, and also in pushing out some new interesting digital content with their new app, and including a really intriguing series. If you're into the mob in Rhode Island, make sure you download that WPRI
And I can
app.
say a lot of people are based on the numbers, which I can't say I'm surprised about that.
Yeah, it seems like it's one of those things that is just, if you do it well, it's a story that people want to hear and want to consume in one way, shape, or form. The mob in Rhode Island.
For sure.
Gentlemen, as we look ahead to 2026, we've already got a little bit of a head start. We have a governor's race. I think that's the most relevant place to start. And there's a little bit of intrigue around this. Right now, we have, of course, Governor McKee, the incumbent, facing an uphill climb in terms of the external, the academic polling numbers. His internals must be showing something a little bit different in terms of what they're seeing, because it doesn't seem like they or some of his supporters are budging all that much in spite of incredibly low approval ratings, at least in some of the most recent polls, including the University of New Hampshire poll. He's going to be primaried once again by Helena Bonanno-Folkes, she, the former CVS executive who came pretty close to defeating McKee in the 2022 primary. And there's some outliers. Joe Shekarchi, apparently he's told the governor on a number of occasions he won't primary him, but will he get into the race? That Joe Shekarchi is the Speaker of the House. What is this going to look like? We'll start with Ted Nesi. Your anticipation for 2026, is this governor's race going to heat up even more than we're seeing it in terms of people getting involved, or even just in terms of the energy we're seeing right now?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Bill, and I didn't say thank you for having me, so thank you for having me.
Of course.
I'm also suffering from a little cold, so if I'm froggy this morning as we talk, I apologize. I think it's interesting because right now, in a way, Governor McKee kind of is exercising a veto over other candidates other than major candidates other than Helena Folkes, right? I think it's basically universally acknowledged that Joe Shekarchi wants to run, but is enough of a practical politician to see that he is going to struggle to win a three-way battle against a fellow major state house figure, the incumbent governor, and Helena Folkes, who already has a lot of money and ran once before. So I think I have actually not been super surprised that the governor is staying in despite the poll numbers. I think he is when he wants to do something, he sticks to his guns. I think we've all seen that many times. So I'm a little more surprised that people who want Shekarchi to run are surprised that the governor isn't budging. Now, could that change? Of course, we've seen, remember what happened with Joe Biden last year, and that was the presidential race. But right now, they're really not giving any signs that the governor's going anywhere. And if so, it could be we end up with just these two figures as the major figures in the race. But a long way to go from here to there.
No doubt about it. And we'll certainly talk about some of the major issues. Of course, the Washington Bridge being probably at the top of most people's minds, at least according to polls, but maybe not the one that impacts them the most. So it'll be interesting to see which candidates are able to harness some of those other issues and lead with them. Ian, at Ocean State Media, you've had some really interesting interviews in and around the figures that we're discussing right now in recent time. Obviously, you have your ear to the ground in general. When you look at 2026, leading with a governor's race, what's your initial thought?
Well, I think one of the huge questions, obviously, Bill, is whether Speaker Shekarchi wants to roll the dice. He is known as a cautious and methodical kind of guy. But if the UNH Survey Center finding that Governor McKee is around 11% of support, that leaves a huge slice of the electorate that is up for grabs. I think the undecided was something like 40 plus percent. That's not surprising at this early stage in the race for governor. But Speaker Shekarchi has to be wondering if something like, 75 plus percent of the vote is up for grabs. Does he have a good shot of winning that in a way and taking it away from Helena Foulkes? I think the potential ace in the hole for Speaker Shekarchi is that the unions in Rhode Island, who are very active in elections and who do not have love for Helena Foulkes, would be inclined to go with Speaker Shekarchi. And if they feel like Governor McKee does not have a realistic chance of winning, they might urge Speaker Shekarchi to run. Shekarchi is obviously a great fundraiser. He has a boatload of money in his campaign finance account. So I think that is something close to watch. We haven't talked a lot about this, but I think one part of the secret sauce for Helena Foulkes, if you will, is that she has a really smart campaign manager. He cut his teeth in Rhode Island, winning races for David Cicilline when he was facing a lot of doubters. He ran Gina Raimondo's first campaign for governor in 2014. Eric has an unbroken record of victories for Democrats across the country. He is a very savvy operator, and he is not to be underestimated.
And of course, on the McKee side, a change in the campaign management took place earlier this year. Not sure if that was just friction within personalities or direction of the campaign. What we've seen right now, though, and I'll ask both of you this, has been, I made this remark a couple of weeks ago last week on Ocean State Media on Lively, that for someone who has foggy memories, but it was no doubt following when Murph York knocked off Bruce Sunland back in the early 90s, and I've been paying attention to this stuff pretty closely ever since. This seems like the most boring governor's race in Rhode Island history. And I think a lot of that's because we have outside campaign messaging a lot of times happening, especially from the McKee side, that it's just not resonating in a way that seems, okay, this speaks to every Rhode Islander. This seems more national and national talking points. This has to change, right? We're going to start to hear about the Washington Bridge. We're going to start to hear about the state of healthcare in Rhode Island. We're going to start to hear more about a personalized, it's going to get dirty, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing from the standpoint of boredom, but this thing has to get more energized. Am I right to assume that, starting with Ted?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think one of the chief knocks on the Helena Foulkes campaign last time was how inactive they seemed in terms of doing events, trying to drive news coverage until the very, very end of her campaign. And, considering how she took off in that final week and a half, you do wonder if they'd been a little more energetic, and they litigate that, and we can put that aside for the moment. But, she had her big kickoff. I don't think she's had a single event since the kickoff, press conference, a round table to draw press coverage. She put out a few printed statements about this and that. And then the McKee campaign, too. He hasn't had a kickoff yet. They're trying to do some anti-Foulkes messaging, but like this week they hit her on the opioid stuff again, but there was no event. There was no public anything. The governor wasn't out there messaging it himself. And I think particularly, Bill, you and I always love to think about media dynamics, and Ian's been thinking about that stuff even longer than you and I. In this era where things are so social media focused, so video focused, attacks that are largely limited to printed statements in what some people are calling a post-literate media environment. How far does that even get? But it is only December, and a lot of people are not paying attention. One other thought before I give back to Ian is I also do wonder with the Foulkes campaign. They see themselves up double digits in these polls. They don't necessarily want Dan McKee to fall further if they prefer a straight race against an unpopular incumbent, right? They don't need him to weaken any further. If this continues on current trend, they're in great shape.
That's a great point, Ted. And I remember Ted once using the phrase, the quiet period of a campaign. I think we're still in the quiet period where the campaigns are kind of road testing their messages and working on raising money. Certainly, this will get a lot more active after we get into the new year. Not much happens around the holiday season. I think the challenge, obviously, for Governor McKee is that feelings are baked in about the Washington Bridge. You know, he can complain that that's not fair. He can say he inherited a broken bridge. But the fact is that the cost for replacing the bridge and the amount of time to do it did both grow extensively after his watch. So Rhode Islanders have some criticism of his handling of that. You know, the governor's campaign has signaled that they plan to target folks a lot on the opioid issue. Whether that is an effective approach, I have a question in my own mind. I think if you buy into that criticism of Helena Foulkes, you probably are not going to vote for her at this point. And I don't know if that moves a lot of voters, even if it's dramatized through the campaign season with people who've been personally affected by it. Maybe a little bit, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah, you mentioned the Washington Bridge, obviously the dominant issue in terms of just conversation. And look, you're absolutely right, Ian. I think back to that day that the eastbound span of the westbound, but whatever it is, the span that was closed, span 17. Westbound, thank you. When that was closed, that afternoon, we were live on WPRO. I remember all of a sudden getting an announcement from the DOT that, oh yeah, the bridge is going to suddenly close at 5 o'clock. And Steve Klampkin had the headline. And the next thing you know, this was dominating a lot of our work for the next several years. I wonder, though, the person in, I don't know, Westerly right now, the person in Boroughville, does the Washington Bridge have the same resonance? Does it have the same stamp of perceived incompetence as it does for the person who's in Barrington who has to drive it every day? And is it going to improve in any way, shape, or form where this doesn't remain a major issue? Obviously, the albatross also around McKee's neck is Peter Alviti, the director of the Department of Transportation, which he's not going anywhere anytime soon. They don't want to fire him because of the potential compromise of the state's lawsuit against 13 contractors. That's the number one thing, of course, behind the scenes. The Local 271, the union, they also are playing a factor in this, and their support for McKee is no doubt tied in somewhere. So you think the bridge is going to remain the big story going into 2026 unless we see the unforeseen take place?
Well, I don't know. It's a good question. Like, how much will we be, again, litigating the bridge versus how much is it just about the damage the bridge did up to now? You know, I mean, when you see his job approval at 21% with the statewide electorate in the UNH poll, I do think even for people who don't use the bridge, I think the drumbeat of seeming incompetence and being asleep at the switch, you know, there was that moment when the governor yelled at Brian Crandall for asking a very legitimate question about Alviti's future at DOT, you know, just suggesting that the problem was accountability toward the administration rather than the problem being the bridge broke. I think that's, I mean, also, you know, you have the other problem that the spotlight it's cast on DOT has not been favorable. You just had this Zach Cunha oversight hearing, and the takeaway was that the director says the way this department operates is we're not really experts on this stuff. We just cut checks to companies that are experts, and we hope and trust that they're doing a good job until we find out otherwise. I mean, that's a criticism of DOT, whether it's a bridge in Westerly or the Washington Bridge. You know, I just think I think there was a road not taken for the governor when the bridge failed in that week and the weeks and months following. You know, I think back to when Charlie Baker took office, the MBT kind of collapsed on his watch. You know, he was like brand new, so a little bit different in timing, but Charlie Baker kind of cemented his rapport with the electorate and never really lost it. And I do think because the governor is correct that you can't say it's all his fault that a bridge that was maybe built in a funky way in the 60s and not maintained for decades failed when he was governor. If he was like, okay, buck stops with me and I'm the governor now, so I'm going to fix it. This is terrible. You know, not that bidding process that didn't get any bids, you know, just they didn't help themselves in how they managed the crisis both immediately and in those opening months, even if now they're in a better place.
Yeah, I'll take your point, Bill, that if people just live and work in a community like Burrillville or Westerly, that certainly they're more distanced from the issue. But I think the bridge has been an overarching issue. You don't have who live in the immediate Providence area have been affected by it. And there's been a big spillover effect. I mean, I remember a lot of times heading back to my home office from the State House last year in the evening and trying to get over the Henderson Bridge, and there'd be a big backup, the types of which we never saw before the bridge became an issue. So I think a lot of people have experiences like that. And in terms of the handling of it, I agree with what Ted said about that.
I think the other thing to keep in mind, to Ian's point there, is political geography, Bill. So, yes, there's a lot of cities and towns that are not probably where people aren't as directly affected by the bridge. Problem is, the bridge is affecting a lot of heartland Democratic primary constituencies. The east side of Providence votes at a high level in Democratic primaries. Barrington now votes at a high level in Democratic primaries. East Providence was a very good city for Dan McKee in the 2022 primary. How's he going to do in East Providence next year after this? So that's the other thing, is you're in the heart of Providence and Greater Providence, not just Providence proper. I think that's part of the issue too.
A funny thing too, I live in the East Bay, so I use the bridge a lot at different times of the day, and it's most of the time it's not that bad. Even if there's a little bit of a backup heading east, usually it clears relatively quickly. It is worse during rush hour or if there's an accident. I know I know of people who live in the East Bay, maybe they commute 4 miles a day into Providence, and sometimes it takes them 45 minutes to get home. In a place like Rhode Island, that's a very frustrating experience. But, outside of rush hour or accidents, the flow of traffic is much better than it was in the past.
Yeah, no doubt credit there where credit's due in terms of experimenting and improving some of the flow of traffic and adding some signage and things like this. Looking at this governor's race, of course, we have one. Well, let's discount some of the, I don't know how to be impolite, but say some of the unserious candidates or people that you've never heard of before. Sure, maybe there's some of these people are going to come up with $1 billion and they're going to be major players. But for now, really, the only significant Republican candidate to get in is Aaron Guckian. He ran for lieutenant governor in 2022, actually had a decent showing, second best performance, I believe, among Republicans for statewide office. He's somebody who worked in the Carcieri administration, most recently executive director of the Rhode Island Dental Association. Yet at the same time, he's got a couple $1,000s in his campaign account. So my question is more so, is Aaron Guckian going to be the Republican nominee? And given when we kind of flip back to where we were just talking, or what we were just talking about, look, that UNH poll shows that there's 41% or so of respondents that are undecided in the Democratic primary. Does that leave room for somebody, be it Republican, Independent, or Democrat, to swoop in? Are we going to see another major player, won't give names, but somebody else swoop in and really shake this thing up?
I'd say it's an open question about whether we see any other Republican get in. We know politics kind of moves in cycles, and it's been a long time, not since Carcieri's second run in 2006, that a Republican was elected governor in Rhode Island. So it's got to happen at some time. Whether next year is the year is unclear, but usually Jessica De La Cruz, the Republican leader in the Senate, responds pretty quickly to me and other reporters. She has maintained radio silence on whether she's rethinking her plans for 2026. She told me in an interview last February that she was ruling it out. Then a couple of months later, she told Ted's colleague, Kim Kalunian, that all options were open. So she's kind of been all over the place on answering that. Of course, there's the 2022 Republican candidate, Ashley Kalus, who continues to enjoy being a commenter on radio politics. She likes weighing in. She certainly has a strong point of view, but I think she's a little bit chastened by how she spent millions of dollars in the 2022 election, and she couldn't break 40%. Now she was a bit of a carpetbagger at the time. Now she's more of a Rhode Islander. She might have a little more appeal, but I think it's unclear. One note on Aaron Guckian, I think on paper, He faces a lot of challenges. Bill, you mentioned how he has just a couple of nickels in his campaign account, relatively speaking. But I thought he gave a very impressive presentation at his campaign announcement. Ted was there too, and he can offer his view. But I thought he was very comfortable in speaking. He espoused a kind of view of being a fiscal conservative and social moderate, which I think aligns well with a lot of where Rhode Islanders are. So the question for Gukian is whether he can really raise the money to effectively raise his profile.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's so many moving pieces to thinking about the November election next year, Bill, right? So if Governor McKee is the Democratic nominee, pulls off an amazing comeback based on his polling right now, on the one hand, you say, well, he's pretty unpopular, so he'd be very vulnerable in the general. Then again, if he's pulled off that amazing comeback, he's probably not as unpopular, right? Something's happened to make him more popular, first with the primary electorate and then maybe in a stronger shape for the general. Then the flip side is if McKee doesn't come out of the primary for one reason or another, all of a sudden you lose some of your, throw the bums out argument from the other side. And then you have the fact that it's going to be a Trump midterm. And when we see the level of overperformance by Democrats in the off-year elections in Jersey and Virginia, in these special elections for Congress, I mean, in a state that's already blue, maybe not as blue as it was in the Obama era, but still reliably voting Democratic, I just think it's just so hard to square that circle as a Republican right now in a blue state where you stay aligned enough with Donald Trump to keep Republican enthusiasm high. I mean, Donald Trump, I think, had a 97% approval rating with Rhode Island Republicans in the UNH poll. So you can't separate from the president really for your base. But if you don't, you have a lot of trouble being credible to the 63% of the electorate that doesn't like Trump. It's just very hard to do. And again, I always say to people, same analysis you'd probably give if you're a Democrat in Alabama. Right? Like you might have an unpopular Republican incumbent in Alabama, but if you can't figure out how to distance yourself from Kamala Harris without upsetting the Democratic base, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, unless you're able to, win a national championship with Auburn or the University of Alabama. Yes. Maybe the UAB Dragons can, whatever it is, you're not going to have a chance in that scenario. Right. Looking at some of the other races, as we kind of wrap up here, Ian Donnis, Ocean State Media, Ted Nesi, WPRI. Legends here, folks. Lieutenant Governor. Okay, it'll be interesting. I think John Laughlin, the Republican candidate, presents an interesting challenge to Sabina Matos if she, in fact, continues to run. She says she is. It seems like more indications are now that she is going to run. The incumbent is going to run as a Democrat. Let's start with the assumption that Matos makes it through, or if she doesn't make it through the primary, another Democrat that makes it through kind of has a similar semi-moderate appeal, so to speak. We're not talking about necessarily somebody who is a far left candidate breaking through on the Democratic side. John Laughlin, most people know him perhaps as a Saturday morning radio guy, plays the Three Stooges, he does a lot of national stuff. But in reality, he's actually a guy when he was at the State House that really knew the business. Does he have a shot?
Bartholomew Town.
You've been hearing me talk a lot about Navigant Credit Union, and for good reason. As Rhode Island's first ever member-owned credit union, Navigant Credit Union has been a staple in the local business community for more than 108 years. Today, Navigant is a $3.4 billion institution serving more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. But since its founding in 1915, the mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Learn more at navigantcu.org. Half Street Group brings a new generation's perspective to leadership communications, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience, message, and culture, and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion leaders in the Ocean State and throughout New England. Join me and Half Street Group founder and president Mike Rea for a conversation every month about news of the day, the hottest media analysis, and a look behind the scenes at how impactful leaders drive conversations. You can learn more at halfstreetgroup.com. Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by Newport Film. Check out newportfilm.com for all the latest screening details. Are you ready to take the next step in your career? At URI Online, we offer business and leadership-focused programs designed to fit your life. Whether your goal is to advance your career in fields like public administration, supply chain management, or training and development, our online programs provide the flexibility you need with the high-quality education you deserve. Learn from experienced faculty and collaborate with a network of professionals, all from the comfort of your home or wherever life takes you. Visit uri.edu/online to explore programs and start building your future today. URI Online. Learn anywhere with us.
I would say yes. I think he's one of the best Republican candidates we've seen in recent history. He's a good public speaker. He's battle tested. He obviously ran a very credible campaign against David Cicilline in 2010. I think he got about 43% of the vote, if memory serves. So, he kind of came out of the left field. I don't think anyone was anticipating him as a candidate, but I think he's a very credible Republican candidate. On the Democratic side, I would say keep your eye on Newport City Councilor Zai Kampsavorowong. He is thinking about running for LG, and I think he could potentially be a very strong candidate. He has the ability to raise a lot of money. He speaks very well. He's worked in finance. He's held kind of a lot of different roles. He's well liked. He ran Frank Caprio's campaign for treasurer in 2006 when Zai was about 22 years old. So he's done a lot in his time in Rhode Island, and I think he could kind of emerge as a new face on the candidate scene. And of course, Cynthia Coyne and Sue Anderbaugh are also running along with Sabina Matos.
I continue to think there could be opportunity for Republicans in races that aren't the top card, right? So I still wonder if Alan Fung had run for treasurer like he originally planned instead of Congress in 2022, I still think he would have had a strong shot at that race. Strong name recognition. There were questions about whether now Treasurer Dioso was ready for the job. And I just think, I don't think most voters feel good about ticking off the same party all the way down their ballot. There's some like hardcore voters, but a lot of voters would like to feel, I'm a reasonable person. I listen to both sides. I'll vote for it. But you need to be presented with someone, if these voters are usually voting Democratic, who they feel they trust. I think an Alan Fung maybe could have passed that trust test, going for something like treasurer, which is very not related to Trump. And I'm intrigued by John Laughlin. I mean, he has, as Ian said, he has experience running, frankly, a bigger race than this one. He's good at media from his years on the radio. And the other thing is LG, the stakes are lower, frankly. So in a governor's race, Helena Foulkes, let's say she's the nominee against, if it's Aaron Guckian, she's going to be making the argument you can't have someone who's at all likes Trump at all being governor because of XYZ. Lieutenant governor, it's probably a little easier to say, how much harm am I really going to do, even if I voted for Donald Trump, Democrats of Rhode Island? Let's have a little balance at the State House. So I don't know. I also do feel like Charlie Brown with the football with the Republicans in Rhode Island, because I've seen Republicans I thought had put together, we're going to be able to clear it, and they haven't. So there's a wait and see, but I think Laughlin, as Ian said, is a very credible person for them to be putting up, and I'm intrigued to see what he does with it.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see, and I agree. Obviously, Zai Kampsavorowong out of Newport, former mayor, which is ostensibly the council president in Newport. Nonetheless, he's got name recognition on Aquidneck Island and throughout the state, and somebody who's a talented individual who could no doubt make an impact and appeal to a wide.
I will say, don't bury Matos yet, because she was above water with Democrats last time her approval rating was tested. So I think she's sometimes written off too quickly.
I would agree that there's no doubt that she's still relevant, and it's going to be a fascinating year in the lieutenant governor's race. All right, lastly here, Providence Mayor. Look, Providence Mayor Brett Smiley. You go around, at least I go around sometimes. I live in Providence. I'm involved in a lot of different aspects of the city. And you hear, Smiley sucks, or this, that, and the other. And I'll ask people why. And there's not usually a strong follow-up. It's just sort of been branded among youth, if you will, that, Smiley sucks. Maybe it's because PBD Fest wasn't that great a couple of years ago, or the bike lanes on South Water Street come up a lot. That's legitimate, because that's what are we doing here kind of scenario. But at the same time, he's not the wholly unlikable candidate that Eric Adams was in New York, or Andrew Cuomo was when he came into that first Democrat primary. So the idea that David Morales, this very talented state rep here in Rhode Island, is going to come in as a Mamdani of Providence and have a successful campaign, I don't think you can look at this race through the lens of New York in any way, shape, or form, because the candidate is positioned so differently. At the same time, no doubt Morales has gained significant traction. More and more people are talking about him, either in a positive way or, maybe one measuring stick is you get here's John in the truck calling from somewhere in Western Rhode Island. Oh, that Morales is going to come and he's going to, we're going to have litter boxes in Providence schools. Oh, good. So that means people know who David Morales is. Is this a legitimate race, or is this a lot of social media hype?
I think it'll be an interesting race to watch and cover. But, Bill, I think you put your finger on it. It's very difficult to defeat an incumbent if voters don't really feel like the candidate or the office holder has blundered and made a big mistake or as a signal failure. Smiley ran on this back to basics effort of emphasizing basic services. I think he is seen generally more favorably than his predecessor, Jorge Elorza. Very smart guy, but, he really didn't seem much interested in politics. And you can't take the politics out of being mayor of Providence. Morales is smart and certainly a very credible candidate. I think he will draw well in some parts of the city, and it was interesting to see in some of the, we saw a special election in Providence this fall, and there was a lot of support for the progressive candidate. I'm sure that was not lost on Mayor Smiley, but I think you still have to rank him as the favorite.
Yeah, I wouldn't add too much to that. I'd say, Mayor Smiley has a lot of support where it counts. The east side of Providence is a strong area for him. And I think, there's another way to look at Mamdani, which is as impressive as his campaign was, and he was as a campaigner, in a very blue state, in a city, he got to, I think, 51% or so. You didn't see with all he had such a damaged opponent in Cuomo, you still didn't see him running up the score 60, 70, 80% of the vote or something like that. So there were a lot of voters clearly with reservations about that further left platform. And so, what you gain in the enthusiasm you're talking about, you can also lose some people who say, well, I'm an Army Democrat. I don't know way over there Democrat. But again, I try to have some humility on every race that, listen to the voters. Maybe they're going to tell me something new, or maybe there's a piece of this I'm not seeing. So, wait and see with Morales. But I do think he should understand the challenge ahead.
And one thing for sure, 2026, a political season. That means the political media, it's game time. It'll be interesting to see what each of your respective organizations roll out. No doubt we have some stuff planned here at Bartholomew Town that we're looking forward to rolling out. We're going to try some different things. And, hey, any last thoughts here as we head into 2026? Anything that we didn't cover that you're looking for?
Well, we didn't really go into the AG race much.
Sure.
I think that a fascinating race right now. There are three Democrats. State Representative Joe Solomon is also considering getting in. And I think the race is basically a toss-up at this point. We'll be looking carefully at the next filing of campaign finance reports to see, for example, if Kim Ahern can raise a lot of money, or, how Keith Hoffman had a good fundraising out of the gate. And Jason Knight is no stranger to Rhode Island politics. So I think, I think these candidates will essentially be competing to see who can be most like Peter Nerona.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm curious, Bill. You and I always talk about media dynamics and, how do you get your message out successfully in 2026? I think it's going to be different from 22, very different from 18, certainly very different from the first races I covered, where it was like get in the Projo every day, get on the evening newscasts, run some TV ads. So, which candidates are successful with social media, who has like a TikTok that goes viral, but then, the primary electorate skews very old. So how much is it sort of frozen in an older media climate of, I have people tell me, and I guess it's good news for me because it pays my mortgage, that in the end, older voters are still watching local TV news. So at least a few more cycles where we're going to be relevant before they put me out to pasture. So I'm curious how all that shakes out.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's going to be a very interesting year. I think of the sort of threshold of, kind of our generation, Ted, where it was, we know about compact discs in the car, and you had to go to Best Buy and install them.
Right.
We know the analog world, and yet we also live in the digital world. That feels like this campaign cycle where television, radio is still going to be super relevant. Obviously, the print journalism, I would include even the digital prints like the Boston Globe or your columns, respective columns, Ted and Ian. But also
the Current, they're doing great work.
The Current, unbelievable work. That's going to be super, unbelievable stuff. It's going to be super relevant. But also, who's going to do the new thing? What's that new thing going to be? We may not know yet. And that might be the difference maker. Ted Nesi, WPRI, Ian Donnis, Ocean State Media. I'll tell you what, they're carving Mount Rushmore, Rhode Island media right now, and I see both of your facades if I look out there.
Oh, you're good to us, William.
Too kind, Bill. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time. Bartholomew Town is brought to you by Navigant Credit Union, Half Street Group, the University of Rhode Island Online, and Newport Film.